Hi there and welcome. This is Gina from McGuire and I hope that you're having a wonderful week. Well, today I am sharing some techniques for creating metallic looks with stencils. I actually have 4 different ideas to share with you today, so I have 4 cards. But in all cases, I used a stencil in various products to give a metallic look. Now, most of my cards are not holiday cards, but these metallic techniques, I think, really lend themselves to holiday cards, so you can definitely do it for that. But there's something fun about having a shiny element on your card, and today's techniques are perfect for that. Let's get started with this first technique, and that is to make an impression with a stencil on metallic paper, and it gives this beautiful embossed look. So this is the new Altenew Skylight stencil. You could use any stencil for this, but I thought this one was neat because it has a center pattern. And I have a piece of silver matte cardstock. Any metallic cardstock would work here. And I am going to use some tape to tape the cardstock to the back of the stencil. You just want to make sure it's centered and stays put. Next, you need to set up your die cut machine as if you were using an embossing folder. But we're going to use an embossing mat. For my big shot, I go to tab 1. Then I put down a metal adapter plate, which is optional. Then a cutting plate. And then this brown Spellbinders embossing mat. This allows me to make an impression with my stencil into the cardstock. So I'm putting my paper down, then the stencils on top. Then I'll put my last cutting plate on top, and I'll run it through. And what's going to happen is there's no cutting since there's no die in there. But the stencil is going to press into the paper because we have that cushiony brown embossing mat. I like to go back and forth a few times, and when I take it out, check out the fun impression that we have. It's nice and subtle, but it draws attention towards the center of the card. You could do this with regular cardstock, but when you do this technique on metallic cardstock, it gives an even more impressive look. Next, I use the Altenew layered snowflake dies. I die cut 3 of the snowflakes from glitter cardstock, 1 in blue, 1 dark blue, and 1 silver. I also die cut a few from white cardstock and stacked them up for that dimensional look, and then glued them all together. I added a few little gemstones, and then I stamped the word Mary on a piece of white cardstock and added it to the center. So basically, I just layered up some snowflakes for lots of dimension. And by the way, if you want to see how to layer these dies, I've used them in a video before, and I'll link it up here on the top right. I also wanted to show you that Mary stamp is from this Altenew Starry Night stamp set. Now that silver impressed piece that we have is 4.5 by 4.5, and I'm putting it onto a bright blue note card that I made that is 4 3/4 by 4 3/4. I'll mail this in a 5 by 5 envelope. I then will use some strong liquid adhesive to add my layered snowflake to the center. This is actually a pretty simple card design, but thanks to that impressed metallic background and the glitter on those layered snowflakes, you really don't need anything else on this card. So one of the fun ways you can use your stencils, especially on metallic cardstock, is by using an embossing mat to make an impression. That embossing mat is a great investment and I highly recommend it. Okay, my next technique is my favorite way to get metallic looks with the stencil. And this is to use embossing paste, any kind of embossing paste or gel, and embossing powder. Now, these are 2 new Altenew stencils. They're sold separately, but I wanted to show them both to you. You have the flowing butterfly and the flowing heart stencil. I decided to use the heart today, but this would look great with the butterfly too. For this card, I decided to use a subtle metallic cardstock. This is kind of a shimmer cardstock. It's from the Nina Metallic Cardstock Assortment Pack. I think this is the white silver that's included. I really like all of the cardstocks included, and I think the price is great too. I'm using tape to kind of mask off that large heart towards the top left of my cardstock piece. Next, I'm going to take Ranger texture paste and a palette knife and apply an even thin layer over the openings on the stencil. Any kind of gel or embossing paste would work here. I just happen to like texture paste, so I have a lot of it. I always like to scoop the excess back into the jar, close it right away, and clean off my palette knife and my stencil right away so it doesn't dry. Now, before we let the texture paste dry on our cardstock, we're going to add embossing powder to it. I'm using Wow Midas Touch Embossing Powder. One of my readers told me about this powder and asked me if I tried it, and I absolutely love it. It's kind of a silver and gold mix with big chunks of glitter in it. And the video really doesn't capture how beautiful it is in real life. But you could use any embossing powder here that you want. I set this aside to dry for just about 5 minutes so the embossing paste dries a little bit. But then I bring the heat of the heat gun to melt the embossing powder, and check out that fun bubbling effect you get. So you get lots of texture here, lots of shine, a really cool metallic look. I'm crazy about this look. I've done it in videos before, but it's especially cool when you use a specialty embossing powder like the one I used today. I decided to keep the rest of the card simple since there's so much shine on it, and I trimmed it down and added it to a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch top folding white note card. I stamped a sentiment onto a thin strip of cardstock, and now I'm cutting a thin strip of foam tape to go to the back of it. I also die cut a hello die cut. I actually did 3 of them and glued them together, all from white cardstock. This is the Altenew Simply Hello die. I'm putting liquid adhesive on the back and putting that right over our embossing. And then I have my little sentiment strip with the foam tape, and I'm putting liquid adhesive on the foam tape. By doing that, I can be really sure that it sticks to that texture. Sometimes foam tape isn't great at sticking on texture. I'm using my T-roller to make sure I have everything straight, and I'll let it dry. And check out that fun textured heart embossing that we have. This looks cool over pretty much any stencil, and it looks great with any embossing powders. You can even mix different powders that you may have to create your own specialty look. I could have done this embossing on regular cardstock, but by doing it on metallic shimmer cardstock, it adds to that metallic feel. And by the way, the Wish You Were Here sentiment is from this Altenew Dearest Friends stamp set that I've used several times in videos. Now, while I had my supplies out, I started this other card, but I didn't finish it. I wanted to show you. Check out the dimension and how cool this is. This is that Midas Touch embossing powder on top of the texture paste, and I use this Altenew Square Weave pattern stencil. What's important to note is that by using embossing paste or some sort of gel or paste underneath the embossing powder, you get tons of dimension. It makes the pattern stand up some. However, if you don't have any kind of embossing paste, texture paste, or gel to do that technique, you can just use Versamark ink, which I'm going to show you on this next example. And although we're using embossing powder again, this look is much more subtle. Okay, so this time I'm using the Altenew Sunburst stencil, and I have some Altenew gold foil cardstock, so this has a lot of shine to it. I'm taping my stencil onto the cardstock so it doesn't shift. I then am going to apply Versamark ink. Any kind of embossing ink that's clear would work here. I'm using my ink blending tool to apply it, but any kind of sponge dauber, makeup applicator, or even your finger would work. You want to make sure to really work that ink into the small openings on the pattern so that you get a complete look when you remove the stencil. Now, when you take it off, you won't see a whole lot. You'll see it's a little muted in some areas, but all you need to do is add some embossing powder. I decided to add gold embossing to this gold background. And what will happen is the gold embossing powder isn't as shiny as the cardstock I used, so it'll kind of be a muted gold in the areas where I added the powder. And you get this beautiful tone-on-tone look. It's just gorgeous. You could use silver on gold, rose gold on silver, whatever you want to do. And you can see it doesn't have as much dimension as it did when we used the embossing paste, but it still is beautiful. It's a completely different look. This gold foil cardstock is pretty shiny. If you wanted something more subtle, you could go for a shimmer cardstock, and the embossing would still look nice. But I actually like how the embossing powder just allows some of that shiny gold to show through. Now that flower in the middle there, I created that in another video. It's actually left over, and I didn't want it to go to waste. But if you click here on the top right, you can check out the video where I created it, so you can see how it's made. I used this Altenew Handpicked Bouquet stamp set. I stamped the images in colored ink, and then I stamped and heat embossed the outline image with gold embossing powder. and I thought that matched our background nicely. The sentiment is from the Altenew Leaf Canopy stamp set. I'm telling you, this stamp set is earning its keep in my craft room because I've used it a lot in videos. I just stamped the thank you with purple ink on a white cardstock strip. So this card shows how you can use a stencil and heat embossing to create a beautiful metallic background. Okay, my last card example combines many of the different things I've talked about in this video along with a few other techniques. Now in this case, I'm going to use the Altenew Dotty stencil, or the Feeling Dotty stencil. I really like the stencil and have used it many times. And I'm just taping it onto white cardstock. I decided to again use the texture paste over the stencil before doing heat embossing because I wanted those textured bumps. If I wanted the bumps to be flat, I could instead use Versamark ink here and then add the embossing powder. After applying a thin, even layer of the paste on top of my stencil, I went ahead and put the lid back on, cleaned my stencils, and then added the Altenew Golden Peach embossing powder. This is a beautiful embossing powder that looks gorgeous when you put it next to silver and gold powders. Now, as I heat set this, you can see that there's bubbles kind of forming inside of each of those little dots. That's because I didn't allow the texture paste to dry first. If you want the bubbles to stay a little more perfect, then let the texture paste dry for like 10 minutes before you bring the heat gun to it. I just really like all the dimension and texture that you get with this technique, and it really doesn't take long at all. The heat gun not only melts the embossing powder, but it dries the texture paste. Next, I decided to create a few flowers with the Altenew Layered Floral Elements dies. Now, these dies are great for creating beautiful layered flowers, but I'm just going to use a few of the single dies to create some flowers for our card that we're going to make metallic. Now, one of the easiest ways to make something metallic is to cover it with metallic embossing powder. If you have a bunch of different colors of metallic cardstock, you could do that. But this gives you some nice texture and beautiful shine, and I don't have that many colors of metallic cardstock. So I pressed my Versamark ink right onto this white die cut, and I'm covering it with Golden Peach embossing powder. Once it's cool, I'm going to repeat that process so I can have some more dimension and even shine on this. I temporarily glued my little flower die cut to that cardstock strip so that I would have a handle and I didn't burn my fingers. I repeated this process with all the other little die cuts I have. Now at this point, I decided I wanted a little more shimmer on my background piece. If you remember, I did this on white cardstock, and I wanted to add some shimmer to that white. I could have used white shimmer cardstock, but I didn't think about it. And here's a fun trick to creating any kind of shimmer cardstock that you want, any color. I used the Cosmic Shimmer Gilding Polish. In the handle, there's actually a sponge applicator, and there's instructions on there on how to use it. But all I'm doing is applying this right over all that embossing that we did. And I'm putting a generous amount down and then really pressing it in to make sure it's getting in all the nooks and crannies. Once I've covered the entire area, I'll use a dry cloth to buff off any excess that is sitting on top of the embossing. So what's happened is we've taken our plain white cardstock in the background and added shimmer to it. It's hard to see in the background, but it really pulls it together nicely. It makes it look like a metallic background. I trimmed this piece down and added it to a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch top folding white note card. I also have a small white rectangle piece for the center of the card, and on this I'm going to arrange all of my little die cut flower pieces. The die cut flower pieces are embossed with either gold, silver, or golden peach embossing powder. I put a piece of craft foam on the back, and I'll add that to the center of my card. I wanted to create a frame to go around our centerpiece here, so I used the Altenew Fine Frame Cover Die to create 3 thin lined frames. This die is great at creating frames for any card because it does a few different sizes. I die cut 3 of the same size, and I'm gluing them together for a stacked look. After I've glued the 3 together, I'm pressing Versamark ink onto the top of it, and then I'll add silver embossing powder, just like I did on the flower die cuts, but this time I'm using silver, And when I heat set that, I'll end up with what looks like a metal frame. Now it's time to glue everything together, and I recommend using a liquid adhesive because you want to make sure it gets in the nooks and crannies of that textured background and holds nicely. I do have a piece of craft foam behind this rectangle piece, so it stands out for added dimension. Now I'm putting liquid adhesive on our faux metal frame that we created, and you can see how that draws attention to the center of our card. We have lots of metallic looks going on here, almost all of it created with heat embossing. So think about the different dyes that you may have and how you can create faux metal accents by covering them with metallic embossing powder. And then you can create faux metal backgrounds using some of the stencil techniques that I showed you today. Oh, and by the way, the "You Are in My Prayers" is from this Altenew Wildflower garden stamp set, and I gold heat embossed it so it would match my flowers. All right, there you have some fun ways to use your stencils to create faux metal looks. I hope you give this a try. It's really fun to do. If you are interested in these products, they're linked below in my YouTube description. You can also head to my blog for links to other related videos and much more information. Thanks for spending time with me. I hope you have a great week, and we'll see you again very soon.